Hey, Mr. P here. In this video, we're going to talk about the photosynthetic equation, specifically C131, 2, and 3. This is an introduction to photosynthesis. It's a very brief overview of the photosynthetic equation. And so when we focus on this particular video, we're going to hit the three objectives C131, 2, and 3. And those objectives state that transformation of light energy to chemical energy when carbon compounds are produced in photosynthesis, conversion of carbon dioxide to glucose in photosynthesis using hydrogen obtained by splitting water, and then oxygen as a byproduct of photosynthesis in plants, algae, and cyanobacteria. So we're going to talk about the photosynthetic equation. We're going to talk about how the inputs, or the reactants, work to produce the products, which are the outputs, and how they play in not only photosynthesis but the cell respiration equation as well. So, to kick off this discussion, we have to identify where photosynthesis exists within a food chain. Throughout biology, you'll see food chains, and we know that food chains can only exist at certain lengths. They can only be a total of 5 levels or trophic levels. Now, this one obviously has 6, but the sun really isn't a trophic level. It's just the origin of the energy for this particular food chain. And so you have the producer level, you have primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer. You can have a quaternary consumer. In this particular food chain, we just have the decomposers, which exist in all food chains. Once all or any of these organisms die, they have to be decomposed. That is the work of fungi and bacteria. But photosynthesis exists at the beginning of every food chain. We know that the plants in all food chains are the producer level, and the fact that they are producers mean they have to produce their own energy. So photosynthesis is the process by which light energy from the sun is changed or transformed into chemical energy in the form of carbon compounds. Now, that carbon compound typically exists in the form of glucose. So grass, in this case, plants, are going to take light energy and they're going to transform it utilizing the photosynthetic equation or the photosynthetic process to turn carbon, which is atmospheric carbon in the form of carbon dioxide, into glucose, which is C6H12O6. This is a carbon compound that is a much larger compound than CO2, and it's the carbon compound that heterotrophs, the primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary consumers, can utilize directly for their energy source moving through the food chain. So, the glucose produced by photosynthesis is used to synthesize macromolecules of life, and those macromolecules are things like carbs, proteins, nucleic acids, and lipids. These are the macromolecules of life. We've talked about those in previous videos. The macromolecules would be carbohydrates, proteins, nucleic acids, and lipids, and they all originate as a carbon compound, usually the carbon coming from carbon dioxide, and all of these are being made from the producer level of these particular food chains. Now, there is some assimilation that has to take place, and there is some consumption and all of these different biological processes, but for now, we are going to live in this particular video right here at the beginning of the food chain, utilizing photosynthesis to convert carbon dioxide into glucose, which is the energy source that all food chain organisms use past that producer level. So, what is the photosynthetic equation? Photosynthesis is carbon dioxide, specifically 6 CO2 plus 6 molecules of H2O, which is water, in the presence of light, solar energy, converts to glucose, C6H12O6, plus 6 molecules of oxygen. If we contrast that with the cell respiration equation, cell respiration is glucose, C6H12O6, plus 6 O2, oxygen, yields 6 molecules of CO2, which is carbon dioxide, 6 molecules of H2O, water, and ATP. Now, ATP is adenosine triphosphate. I know we've talked about it in previous videos. That is the energy currency, or the form of energy that all cells utilize for their biological processes. This is the reason cells go through cell respiration, known as aerobic respiration. But in order to get the glucose needed to power this cell respiration aerobic process, plants at the producer level have to utilize photosynthesis in order to make the glucose that then all of these consumers consume or eat in order to power their aerobic respiration to get to the ATP that is needed to keep these particular organisms alive. These organisms require glucose. They cannot make it. They have to consume it. Grass and the producers actually utilize glucose as well. Plants and other producers are going to utilize cell respiration as well. They just have to make the glucose utilizing photosynthesis before they can then use glucose to power the aerobic process to produce the ATP energy they need to sustain themselves. So if we focus on photosynthesis a little more in depth, we know that we have 6 CO2, carbon dioxide, plus 6 H2O, water, yields in the presence of light energy. That light comes from solar or sun. Yields or produces glucose, C6H12O6, plus 6O2, which is oxygen. Now, if we focus on where those particular things, the reactants and products, are being used and made within a plant, light energy is going to obviously hit the part of the plant above ground. So you'll notice that part of the plant is above ground and part of the plant is below ground. The portion of the plant below ground are the roots, and the roots are designed to uptake water. So the water uptake is going to happen under the ground. That's utilizing osmosis. Water is going to be taken in by the roots and moved up the plant utilizing transpiration and the transpiration stream. Light energy is going to hit the part of the plant above ground. Notice this is the part of the plant that is green. So a plant contains chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is a pigment. Pigment is protein. All of the chloroplasts that exist within the plant cells that make up the plant biomass above ground are going to contain chlorophyll. The chlorophyll is going to absorb this solar energy and utilizing a series of chemical reactions, which we'll talk about in later videos, the light-dependent and the light-independent reactions. It's going to utilize CO2, carbon dioxide, as an input. It's also going to utilize, again, like I said, water as an input. And the plant is going to use the two inputs, notice carbon dioxide and water. Water coming in through the roots, CO2 coming in through the leaves, specifically the stomata, little tiny openings on the bottom side of the leaf. And that carbon dioxide and water is going to be utilized within the plant to produce two products. Now, the products being produced are sugar, C6H12O6, that is glucose. That is what the plant is utilizing photosynthesis for. And in the process of producing the sugar, it's going to produce a byproduct, which is oxygen gas, which will be released to the atmosphere and is really unneeded for the plant, at least within photosynthesis. This sugar is going to be contained within the leaf tissue of the plant and is going to be used for its own aerobic respiration when it utilizes cellular respiration to produce ATP. But when an animal comes along, like a rabbit or a deer, and eats this plant, it's consuming the sugar that that plant is storing in that particular biomass. And so redox reactions exist as a coupled reaction. Redox exists, reduction and oxidation. Reduction is loss of electron and oxidation is gain of electron. And so carbon dioxide is said to be reduced, and it is going to be reduced into glucose. Notice the carbon dioxide on our reactant side is the carbon containing molecule, and glucose on our product side is the carbon-containing molecule. So CO2 is going to be reduced into glucose because it is gaining electrons. Electrons are being added to carbon dioxide, and it is growing in molecular size and molecular weight from CO2 to C6H12O6. The other reactant, which is water, is going to be losing electrons, and so water is going to be split in a process called hydrolysis. Electrons are going to be cut out. and oxygen is going to be released once the hydrogens are pulled off, utilizing again that hydrolysis reaction. All of these reactions we're going to talk in more depth in later videos, but water has electrons taken from it, so it is said to be oxidized, and therefore oxygen is produced, which is released to the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide has electrons added to it. It is said to be reduced, and so it is growing in molecular size from CO2 to C6H12O6. That's it for this particular video. We talked at length about the photosynthetic equation. We related it to the cell respiration equation. We talked about the inputs and outputs of photosynthesis. I hope you learned something. If you have a question, leave it in the comments. Subscribe to the channel. We'll see ya. Bye.